My name is Tomie Arai, and on behalf of the AAPI Voices Project and the Archives Memorial Exhibition, and my co-curator Diane Wong, and a wonderful team of volunteers, educators, and activists and archivists that include Lena Sze, Vivian Truong, Laura Chen Schultz, Crystal Bike, Preeti Sharma, me, Hyun Yoon, Amina Magnani, and Shannon O'Neill. Welcome. We are so thrilled that so many of you could join us for the culminating event of our exhibition and our residency here at the Storefront for Ideas. We have a really wonderful program planned for you tonight, but before I start, I just wanted to share with you how much this project has meant to me. And for over 3 years, it was a lifeline for me. It was a chain of people, stories, acts of generosity that uplifted me during a very dark and chaotic time. And I also wanted to thank all of the participants in the project who made me so aware that it was the people who are most impacted that need to lead and who need to be heard. And in that spirit, I also really want to acknowledge narrators like Alice Wong and Chanika Svetvilas, who introduced me to disability justice and who pointed out so clearly that isolation undermines all our efforts for collective liberation. And also in that spirit, how important collective access and recognizing wholeness and what's the third thing? Organizing across movements is so foundational to change and to imagining a world post-COVID. So I want to thank you all, and I hope that tonight will be an opportunity for you to connect with each other and build lifelines of your own. And I'd like to hand this off to Diane, who's also going to say a few things.
Thank you, Tamia. I love you. So 3 years into the pandemic, and I'm still not used to seeing so many faces of people that I love so close together. So I just want to say thank you. Grateful for each of you for just coming here today, sharing space with us. This project began in the midst of COVID lockdown in New York City in March, April of 2020. And our dear friend Lena, who's here with us tonight, but sometimes hides. When our dear friend Lena sent an email wanting to process what was unfolding around us. And so a few of us responded to her initial email saying that we were interested in holding space for each other, but we also felt paralyzed by the world around us, but also felt a sense of urgency to document how our communities were facing so much loss. So Archive as Memorial is one of many life forms that this APA Voices project has taken over the last 3 years, from a series of virtual programs, to annotated interviews, to listening sessions, to more recently a published article in the Journal of Asian American Studies, which we'll read some excerpts of today. And we're just really grateful to the staff here at ISS, Immigrant Social Services, Beatrice Chung, who's with us today. Woo! Sophia Ma, who's been here in the store more than we have been. Karen Liu, who can't be with us today, for just offering this space, a former empty storefront converted into a space for community for us to gather like this today. And so also for entrusting us to become the inaugural community amplifiers in residence. Hopefully it's something that will continue over time. Over the last 2 months, the response has really been overwhelming. Initially, we weren't sure if folks would be ready to memorialize something that's still unfolding, right? But people have been so responsive. We've had hundreds of students come into this space as part of their classes. We've had a lot of interest in residents who keep coming over and over each week. And so it seems as though, we were hoping that this would be the culmination of this project, but it's kind of continued to grow over time. And so just as the archive keeps growing, this exhibit does the same. So if you look here, after the Monterey Park, Half Moon Bay shootings and the murder of Tyree Nichols, we decided to put up a memorial right on the window of the storefront, and people left messages. One visitor told me, I don't know if she's here with us today, but she told me that she wasn't sure she even needed a physical space to mourn until she stepped into the space and wrote a note to post on the window. And that action for her was cathartic, a reminder that we need these spaces to gather our grief. So this project is an experimentation in mourning, both for our futures and for our pasts. And so today we're hoping to close out this show by inviting friends, family, community, donors, narrators, just to share some of what this looks like, what this feels like. So I'm going to invite Shannon O'Neill up here, who's going to share a few words. Thank you.
Thanks, Diane. So good evening, everyone. My name is Shannon O'Neill. I'm the curator for the Tamiment Library and Robert F. Wagner Labor Archives at NYU Special Collections. And the Tamiment has the honor and privilege of being an archival home for APA Voices, a COVID-19 public memory project. I first want to extend my gratitude to all the many collaborators, narrators, facilitators, interviewers, and contributors to this project. To my colleagues at NYU's APA Institute, Laura Chen Schultz, Anita McNamee, and Gracia Brown, for bringing me into this fold and for all of the work that you do. To Storefront for Ideas and Immigrant Social Services for hosting this exhibit, and to Tomie, Arai, and Diane Wong, and all the members of the curatorial community for this beautiful curation of the show. In the last few weeks, for whatever reason, there's been certain spaces in New York City that I felt drawn towards, spaces with a slightly different gravitational weight or pull. Maybe it's the invocation on the wall text right here next to the entryway to refuse the capitalist imperative to move on. But Archive as a Memorial is one of those spaces where I simply just wanted to spend time to just be. I came by that exhibit a few times. The last time was on March 16th. Something that morning told me to come back. I felt it rather urgently in my body. I'm gonna take off my mask, sorry. And I ditched work a little early that day, sorry, NYU. And as I re-entered the exhibit, I remembered it was the anniversary of the 8 lives that were lost in Atlanta. I sat with the Red Canary Song installation for some time, and I made a paper flower offering in memory for those 8 lives, and let myself move around the exhibit. And just a quick note of thanks to the workers who were here that day, who were doing a 360 photography gallery and artworks photography. Thank you for sharing the space with me then. Oftentimes when I'm in an exhibit or when I'm working with an archive, I ask myself, what do I notice? But on the 16th, I asked myself, what do I feel? That day, I felt the way that memory and memorialization, or at least the way that I remember and memorialize, can have the sensation of a loop, although not a loop or a cycle that is stuck in one track, because while each turn of the loop is familiar, I come back to a familiar place. As I come back to that familiar place, I've been changed in some way. It's a return, but each time I return, I'm a little different. I thought about the loop or the connections and resonances, for example, between the Red Canary Song installation at the front of the gallery and the bookshelf of abolitionist texts curated by the Asian American Feminist Collective that is quite literally pushing up against a wall separating the gallery and a construction site of a 40-story mega jail. Spatially, in the gallery, they're almost like two foci on an ellipses. There are also 2 points of many in an ongoing dialogue about the power of community, about the imperative of accountability, and the essential necessity of care and care work. Dialogue, as a set of mutual exchanges, is perhaps a kind of loop. On the 16th, I also stood for a while, watching and rewatching the looping videos for Fly and Power and My 7 Years in Flushing, each time seeing or hearing something new, each time feeling different. Even the 360 photography happening here on the 16th was a kind of visual loop. We often think of archives as static sites, fixed, preserved, situated, past, complete. But in reality, the archive is always changing, and in many ways is always incomplete. Every time the archive is encountered, the archive changes. New meanings or understandings or knowledges are created again and again and again. Memory does this too, I think. And this perhaps becomes even more so true if we understand the archive as memorial and the memorial as an ever-changing loop. I don't know what the shape of an ever-changing loop is. I know it's not a spiral. It's maybe a shape that is still unknown to me. What I do know is that APA Voices shapes and reshapes the archive anew. It's an archive that redefines archival practice as embodied, a practice that is done with and for, not a practice that is done by and to. It's an active practice that is always collaborative and in this way always nurturing. There's a quote in this exhibit from Lena Sze. Sorry, Lena, you're getting a lot of shout-outs for someone who once died. But there's a quote in this exhibit from Lena Sze, and the quote says, "Memory work is no perfect thing. It does not resolve trauma. It doesn't correct history. It's incomplete, ongoing, unfolding, imperfect in every way." I started with gratitude, and I'll end with gratitude, another kind of loop. Thank you for, as Lena says, the ongoingness, the unfolding, the ever-changing loop that is Archive as Memorial and APA Voices. And now I'm going to turn the mic over to Beatrice.
Hi everybody, my name is Beatrice Chen. I'm the Executive Director at Immigrant Social Services. Almost 5 years ago, I left the world of cultural and arts organizations and came to Immigrant Social Services, which at its core is direct services. We provide after-school care and education for children in Chinatown and Lower East Side 5 days a week. We serve over 600 students every day during the school year. Without which a lot of their working class parents would have to give up their jobs. And it's still really surreal to me because almost 3 years ago, the public schools were shut down. And we were given 24-hour notice, and overnight I have 100 after-school staff who just kind of was like, no jobs, no future. And so it is really, and we just continued. And I feel like having this space and this exhibition has also been, really able for me to really process. And a lot of us in the social services and direct services, we kind of continued serving the people of our communities. And I'm going to present sort of from the social services, human services perspective of the meaning of this exhibition. The space itself, we would not have gotten this without the pandemic. So sort of double-edged sword there. And also the funding, a lot of the funding that's from the government allocated to Asian Americans, a lot of that has been a direct result of the pandemic. Unfortunately, but thinking about it positively is like, how do we leverage that? How do we continue building on that? And the way government allocations work, it's about data. And when I see stories being shared, that to me is really important data. There's not a lot of data on Asian Americans, and which makes it really hard for organizations like us to make a case for allocation to our community who really, really need it. And so I'm really grateful to Tomie and Diane and their team and NYU APA for bringing this. And then, and for Chung, who very generously essentially gifted us this space to do what we want, which is like never happens for nonprofits. And so we really hope to continue that. using this as a space for the community to interact with other members of the community, and then also on the nonprofit side is sort of the cross-sectoral work that really I feel like is so much more important as we advocate for more services and more allocation to our community, and I'm hoping for more partnerships in the future. And so thank you everybody for coming.
is Chung. I am an architect, and I have been organizing with Red Canary Song for over 2 years. Unfortunately, the rest of the RCS collective couldn't make it today because we are a collective of volunteers, and we've had a crazy month full of events, including our annual community vigil for Atlanta and the premiere of our documentary. The portraits that I just took down and put away were the 8 life the 8 lives taken from us in a tragic murder that happened on March 16th, 2021. They were painted by an anonymous massage worker from our community. This installation was first conceived as part of the vigil happened last year at Washington Square Park for the tragic shooting. It was titled Ren, Curtain Armor. The Chinese character Ren consists of fabric on the left side and a blade on the right side, and together it means tenacity and perseverance. We chose to use curtains to create a safe space for mourning and grieving because it's both a form of decoration and an infrastructure that constitute the practice of resistance and solidarity in the transient community of Asian migrant massage workers. Instead of providing shelter, the architectural enclave of massage parlors is constructed both materially and socially as a trap of violence, oppression, and exploitation for the capitalist system that is inherently racialized, gendered, and classified. Refuged yet unsheltered, massage workers appropriate curtains to dress up storefronts of massage parlors while at the same time disguise the domestic and transactional spaces behind. Though lacking physical strength, these sheer fabrics cultivate a form of decentralized, anonymous yet interdependent urbanity for survival. On behalf of our Canary Song, we'd like to thank the AAPI project for the invitation to share space and time with everyone here, the ISS for hosting us here for the past 2 months. Please take a flower with you as we move to the back of the room for several poetry reading. Next. Thank you.
I wrote this piece called Weeks in the Womb, and it was for my child, who's now 2.5 years old, and at the time, he was in my partner's womb. Weeks in the womb. It's April, 20 weeks in your mother's womb when she and her sister take a walk through the neighborhood park. A man calls them fucking chinks and spits towards them. Such occasions mark your beginning. The man's hatred and delusion doesn't notice the baby inside her, that there is life on top of life in her body. So if he had a knife or acid to throw like some other lost souls in this city, he would have ripped you open or burned through twice the sanctity of my family. This marks your start. 10 weeks prior in the womb, we shared momos and taro buns with Malaya, who was visiting from San Jose. We talked Duterte, the plight of the people, Rhapsody, D-Smoke. We satiate the meal, talk about the 20 years between us. When he leaves, we hug. I clean the plates, notice purple crumbs, that smile. 10 weeks prior in the womb, your mother and I weep over the film Queen and Slim. We stand in the lobby of the theater, arms wrapped and sobbing, braced in the heartbreak of a fictional reality we know to be true. This is your first movie. 8 weeks prior in the womb, Annie and Moss have their baby shower for your baby buddy Dash. This is your first party. 9 weeks prior in the womb, my old bandmate Takanori plays his West Montgomery fingers over his hollow body guitar at Tomie's. I know you heard that reverb by the way you dance in the womb. This is your first concert. Our friend Abe plays drums, delivers lines, and belts at Signature Theater like we've never seen him before, like audiences never seen before. Cambodian rock band, this is your first play. At a day of remembrance at the JA Church, you and your mother love the Inari Zushi. You come from a long line of people who love Inari, across seas, through barbed wire fences. The Lakers went on a run in March, only to be stopped by Brooklyn. We are on the couch. Your father watches the games on the TV while your mother naps. We rest while caressing you over your mother's belly. These warm hands, your first blanket. 20 weeks in the womb, we are alive during a genocide through federal neglect. Over 10,000 dead and no sign of the number slowing down. From Queens to Brooklyn, Detroit to Chicago, New Orleans to Newark, there aren't enough beds, ventilators, masks, gloves, scrubs, care, compassion, generosity to adequately deal with this pandemic. 20 weeks in the womb, these nurses, doctors, grocery store clerks, farmers, delivery folks on the front lines continue to go to work. Their courage moves us. Your uncle, the baker, lost his job, like millions of other people in this country. He, like all of them, did not deserve this. He's still baking, though, making tutorials online. He makes a dough as tender and beautiful as his heart. His bread is waiting for you. Your mother persists too, holds space for her team. Your father holds space for his students, as best we can in virtual spaces. 20 weeks in the womb, the earth is reshaping itself. We are breathing in an age where there's a shortage of breaths. You take your breaths amidst water through a cord to your mother, underneath the cocoon of a belly, soft like milk bread. 21 weeks in, your mother starts experiencing Braxton Hicks contractions, brief cramps that are said to prepare her body for your birth. Nature, true to her programming, invites us into signals of what is to come before it is fully present. The deaths keep ballooning. Public school staff, MTA staff, folks in prison. Arundhati Roy once spoke about the era of new genocide, a byproduct of globalization. New genocide occurs when human-imposed conditions lead to mass death without people actually going out and killing other people. An example would be economic sanctions against Iraq, when in 97 and 98, U.S. sanctions on Iraq claimed more than 500,000 children's lives. New genocide is created when there is a purposeful withholding of necessary resources for a population. This applies to the earthquake aftermath in Puerto Rico a year ago, and undoubtedly this COVID-19 pandemic. The overwhelming majority of losses being preventable if contingency plans, available equipment, and medical staff were deployed to people in timely and responsive ways. You are in the womb during a new genocide. Its capital is the city of your father's birth. Your parents, friends, and colleagues are losing their fathers, mothers, friends, grandparents. These are swift, pummeling deaths. Cleave lungs and vocal cords like Eric Gardner. Say their names, they can't breathe. By the end of May, we know the names of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, and more. Something cracks open. The streets flood with protesters, statues fall, statements and more statements fly. Former students lead the way while we quarantine with your mother, a tipping point, a rebellion and reckoning in response to double pandemics. Black American spring, this birth right here before you. 30 weeks in the womb, your mother and I decided a name for you, YiuYiu. In Korean, it means freedom, free, both noun and adjective. You are YiuYiu, can be YiuYiu, feel YiuYiu. May you know what this year means, this moment, and may it be in our mother's tongues. At 31 weeks, we welcome a Monstera deliciosa to add to our plant family. The Swiss cheese plant grows holes in her adult leaves so light cascades to the smaller leaves below. What holes will we grow to let love shine through to our young? What do we let go to give space for? Week 41, contractions accelerate, muscles tighten and release in the rhythm of a storm. Divinely dangerous, the labor which begets all labor, the work that precedes all work. Rings of fire. Week 41, you're here. YiuYiu is late, is on time. Wednesday, August 26th, the Milwaukee Bucks and NBA team goes on strike. The first time for any professional sports team to do so. The Sunday before, Wisconsin police hail 7 bullets and paralyze a 29-year-old black father, Jacob Blake, in front of his children. At a protest in Kenosha, 2 protesters are shot to death. Other major sports athletes also act in solidarity with the Bucks. It's 4 years to the day when Kaepernick first kneels in a game. Freedom contracts, freedom cascades. When you first slide out of your mother's womb, you take a moment and realize you're no longer in a world of amniotic fluid. You wail, skin to skin with us soothes you. Your mother can't believe how small you are, a miniature nose, feet, hands. To think we were all that tiny once, small bundles turning into tall things. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Thria, but you can call me T. I am a trans abortion nurse, artist, and community organizer with the People's Health Education Program. Today, I'm going to read for you a little excerpt from a zine that I had written during the Omicron wave, almost 2 years ago now. The zine is called On Communism and Radical Care, and this is the final thoughts. Settle your quarrels, come together, understand the reality of our situation. Understand that fascism is already here, that people are already dying who could be saved, that generations more will live poor, butchered half-lives if you fail to act. Do what must be done, discover your humanity and your love in revolution. George Jackson. We are currently living in a mass disabling event precipitated by capitalist imperialist expansion, disproportionately affecting the most vulnerable and hyper-exploited people, in the heart of a decaying empire that systemically does not care about the people who provide reproductive labor. As it currently stands, the general population is blissfully unaware of what it means to be living in a mass disabling event. It means that the consequences of COVID, the intergenerational trauma, will persist long after the pandemic ends. We are already seeing an increased need for outpatient care to help the influx of newly disabled people living with long COVID. And unless the medical industrial complex is abolished altogether and replaced with something entirely new, something rooted in love and care, we will not have the infrastructure to meet this need. We already do not have enough primary care providers, outpatient specialists, mental health care workers, physical therapists, occupational therapists, etc., to handle the current crisis. And things will only get worse from here unless we act quickly and build towards a total revolution. This is all just to say that many people will suffer in the long term without any of the resources or knowledge or support that they need. And because we live in an ableist society, this is not necessarily a new phenomenon. It will just affect millions all at once, and many of those people will be children. We are facing a rising need for care during a crisis of care. We're seeing a decreasing supply of care providers because of systemic neglect and organized abandonment, leading to burnout and compassion fatigue. As of November 2021, nearly 500,000 healthcare workers in the so-called US have quit since February 2020. That's 1 in 5. Between 35 to 54% of American healthcare workers report already feeling burnt out before the pandemic. And people who provide reproductive labor are already underpaid, underappreciated, and overworked even without a global pandemic. And now are either dying by the thousands or developing long COVID. They themselves will need the very care they give to others. But who will care for the caregivers when everyone has quit from burnout, gotten long COVID, or died from COVID? When I think of the dwindling amount of healthcare workers, I think of the Filipino healthcare workers who were the backbone of the healthcare industry globally and therefore bear the brunt of the pandemic. Filipino nurses make up only 4% of the total nursing population in the so-called US, yet 32% of nurses in this country who died from COVID were Filipino. And they are just one example of the countless migrants from the global south whose lives were sacrificed by the ruling class to keep the economy running. This is the product of capitalist imperialist expansion. This is border imperialism working as intended, siphoning labor, land, and resources from communities of the world, creating an exploitable labor pool, leaving behind the most vulnerable to die. It is assumed that care, like nature, is an infinite resource that does not need to be replenished, but this is a false assumption. Care, like any resource, is finite, and caregivers, like any other living being, have material and social needs that are simply not being met by the state or society. What does it mean for caregivers to be depleted of all their energy, to be so drained that they resort to numbness as their survival mechanism? What does it mean for them to be forced to work without any of the resources to do their jobs, let alone survive? How will this affect their home lives, their personal lives, our collective lives? I think a lot about the children of nurses, domestic workers, teachers, caregivers, and what their lives must be like now. I think a lot about what it must be like to be a child growing up during the pandemic, what it must be like to be exposed to constant death, illness, disability, destruction of all forms of life on Earth. I think about my 9-year-old cousin and the kid I babysit who's the same age, and how the both of them are children of healthcare workers like myself. I worry that they'll get COVID, or worse, get long COVID and live a life of disability. And I worry not just about them, but about every single kid out there, especially ones whose parents provide reproductive labor for a living. What would it mean for children to get long COVID? How will this affect them emotionally, socially, physically, cognitively, mentally, spiritually? What would it mean for the children to get COVID, give it to their parents, and watch their parents die? What kind of guilt will they have to carry for the rest of their lives? What future are we offering to them when we put them back in schools during a wave of high cases and deaths? Or rather, what future are we denying them when we risk their lives and health for the sake of profit? I don't even want to imagine the kind of future we are currently offering them. I don't want to imagine the long-term pain and suffering of growing up with long COVID or growing up without a parent because they died of COVID. I want to instead take this as an opportunity to cherish the young ones in my life and remind myself that they are precious beings who will bring to life so many new wonders. I want to also remind myself and others that children have no say in how they get any of their basic provisions, and therefore must be protected, cherished, cared for, nurtured, and radically loved. We must center our politics on the youth, not only because their lives are precious, not only because they are our future, but because when we center, cherish, care for, and nurture them, that means we are also centering, caring for, and nurturing ourselves, the very people who provide care for them. The revolution starts at home. It starts locally with ourselves, the people in our lives, our larger community. We must start with showing revolutionary love and care for the masses through Serve the People programs, in which we help the people better understand the root causes of their struggles, help them find solutions, and empower them with the tools to implement said solutions. We struggle alongside them. To serve the people does not mean to just feed the people, clothe them, house them, educate them, defend them, arm them. It means empowering ourselves and each other with the knowledge and resources we all need to not only survive, but ultimately fight to overthrow the capitalist ruling class, who will continue to destroy life in all forms unless we, the people, stop them. It means uniting the people of the world to, quote, seize the means of production and distribute the wealth and technology in an egalitarian way to the many communities of the world. To serve the people means helping them realize their power, our collective power. And I truly believe in our collective power. I believe we can move mountains when we move as one. A better world is not just possible, a better world is inevitable, and now more than ever, we must be done. People of the world, unite and defeat the US aggressors and all their running dogs. People of the world, be courageous and dare to fight, defy difficulties and advance wave upon wave. Then the whole world will belong to the people. Monsters of all kinds shall be destroyed. Chairman Mao. Dare to struggle, dare to win, all power to the people. Thank you.
Thank you, T. I'm Kristina Wong. Hello, everybody. I'm the accidental and very proud founder of a mask sewing collective called the Auntie Sewing Squad. And have you heard of us? I hope you've heard of us. So we have a quilt that's in the back. This is her real name, Melissa Quilter. Made that, ironically, her last name's Quilter. But that's a quilt that she made with a lot of leftover fabric, and it features pictures from our Facebook group, which was founded 3 years and 1 day ago. I thought it was going to be a temporary thing, and now I find myself reading out of our book. and touring a show called Kristina Wong Sweatshop Overlord, which is a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize. No big deal. No big deal, folks. But I'm going to read you this introduction to the book that I wrote in August 2020 when we didn't know when this was going to end. When I first started the Auntie Sewing Squad, the thinking was, when factory-made masks become readily available on the market, we'll retire. What I didn't realize was that tens of thousands of people in America can't access even cheap factory-made masks. Communities long forgotten by the federal government before the pandemic were now getting hit extra hard. Never did I imagine that I would pull my mother and her friends out of retirement to order them around my remote sweatshop. Never did I imagine that I would be politicizing the term sweatshop to point to the failure of the federal government in preparing us for this crisis. Never did I imagine how politically polarizing the act of wearing a mask would become. Never did I imagine how political the act of sewing two pieces of fabric together for a total stranger could be. Never did I imagine how many aunties from all over North America would rage stitch with us. And never did I plan for the group to make a book. Before I became the factory overlord of the Auntie Sewing Squad, family cult, labor camp, amateur medical supply company, shadow government aid agency, I was a performance artist who was scheduled to embark on a national tour of Kristina Wong for Public Office, a show about how I ran and won for a seat on my neighborhood council. In the before times, I sewed my set pieces and props, but never did I imagine I'd be using my half-assed home ec skills previously used to stitch fabric ruffles into giant labia shapes to now make life-saving medical equipment, with used bed sheets and conference lanyards at that. I'm becoming the overlord of a Chinese sweatshop, I declared, when the first volunteers to step up were mostly Chinese and Asian American women. It wasn't hard to see the irony of college-educated Asian American women whose parents and grandparents did invisible back-breaking garment labor to pay their debt to the American dream, now performing that same work like some kind of ancestral destiny. This time, doing it for no pay, with far less appreciation from others of the amount of time and skill that sewing requires as we become a country Amazon primed for instant satisfaction without consideration of the workers who make our things. And even after much American manufacturing has moved to China, here we were, diasporic Asians trying to put together an ad hoc assembly line from our home sewing machines. Oh, America, land of opportunity. No craft store, not even fucking Joann's Fabric, was prepared for the 2020 trend of sewing cloth face masks to stop the spread of COVID-19. Every vendor in the country ran out of elastic and fabric, and factory-made masks were out of stock for weeks. I was like Robinson Crusoe, and my desert island was my home in Koreatown, Los Angeles, waving down every hobbyist seamstress on Facebook for leads on where to find elastic. Aunties were chopping the straps off their bras, sawing the elastic off their fitted bed sheets, knitting I-cord from scraps of yarn. No t-shirt was safe. No half-finished quilt project too precious to sacrifice for DIY personal protective equipment. Now, in the early days of the pandemic, because this shit has gone on so long, I can separate it into eras, I was running in and out of my home 10 times a day with fistfuls of elastic, meeting masked strangers to whom I'd given my address to on the internet because they had offered to help sew. I was buying dressmaking shops out of their elastic for cash and immediately mailing spools away to strangers in other cities, even if the postage cost as much as the spools. Some of these strangers became aunties in our group. Others I had to trust were going to make good on their promises to sew masks for essential workers out there and not just resell it on Etsy. In a moment of desperation, Auntie Karen offered her son's well-washed underpants for us to use for its elastic and fabric content. We declined, but we considered it. Let's see. Aunties have found themselves with all the big things that, okay, sorry. I was trying to skip a paragraph, I'm just going to read it. As dozens of new aunties flooded into our group, I shifted away from the sewing machine to become a supervisor, orienting new aunties to our group. The playwright Amy Tofty, a casual rideshare acquaintance turned pandemic BFF, stepped up to get us more organized. We created a team of super aunties to identify communities that were in real need, the ones that we couldn't wave us down for help on the internet because they didn't have internet. A few months in, the world found itself in a quadruple pandemic: health, racial, political, and economic. And the aunties found ourselves with all the big things that big organizations have, like a logo, a fiscal sponsor, big donors, major press, but no salaries, no health benefits, no company retreat, and no end in sight. The great irony of this mask-making empire was that in the before times, in Los Angeles, in the lockdown, I refused to initially wear a mask. As an Asian American, I was already walking around with a mask I can't take off. The mask that says to the world, hey, blame me for the coronavirus. Adding a mask on top of my existing mask would bring attention to that. And even as a performance artist, I didn't want that attention. Building ASS, which I didn't realize was our acronym until a week after I made our Facebook group, has been a radical experiment in generosity, intersectional alliances, and a paradigm outside capitalism. I never set out to lead a remote sweatshop empire during the apocalypse, but that's where unprecedented times take us. Like finding out that an old pillowcase can yield 5 face masks. We discover all sorts of things about ourselves we didn't know were possible. So if you've ever wanted to exploit unpaid manual labor, coerce children to help you out, and be lauded as a hero, you've come to the right place. Or at least landed in a moment of American history where it's become clear we have no leadership, no supply chain, no infrastructure, and definitely no quarter-inch flat braided elastic. If this is the end, we go down sewing. Thank you. So we have been, thank you. We've been shitting on capitalism a lot, but I do encourage you to buy our book. It is on Amazon, but I do have 4 copies if you want to Venmo me. I'll be here for the next few minutes, but thank you, everybody.
Hello, everyone. My name is Kai Naima Williams. I'm a poet and a writer. I'm also Tamia's granddaughter. Thank you, Grandma and Diane, and everyone who contributed to this project for having me. I'm so happy to be here celebrating this incredible archive with you all. I'm going to read a poem called Radical Imagination. It was written in the summer of 2020, and it begins with a quote from Mumia Abu-Jamal. So this is Radical Imagination. Conventional wisdom would have one believe that it is insane to resist this, the mightiest of empires. But what history really shows us is that today's empire is tomorrow's ashes, that nothing lasts forever. In this, our new country, I gather my children, say, how lucky you are to grow up out of ashes. We have buried all the emperors for you to play with your cousins on the grass their bodies give, the only thing they had to offer the earth in the end. For you to run free through prairies, hills, forests, and fields that belong to none of us. Because in this country, we sidestepped the grave error of etching our names onto everything with its own language. Instead, we let the land break our tongues over its own pronunciation. This time, the land tells us how we can be of use, and we train our ears to receive. And that was just the first decree. In this, our new country, where it is not a crime to come from somewhere else, and citizenship is granted upon reenactment of one's most beloved proverb, since every other is part of one. Another blended harmony standing out in a national anthem, and you can be a bended knee, or raised fist, or palm over heart, since in this country, we mind our own business. Don't tell nobody how to move against the swell of song in the old empire. They labeled us poison while letting the life out of water. Isolated us like illness in the body they drew us into, a body they invaded first and claimed to have came to consciousness inside. They constellated the land with confinements.
cut fences and clamped circles round whole demographics, from the knowingest grandmother to the freshest son who never got the chance to be alive and young enough not to be hated by his country. They shut us into camps, concentrated their eyes on our entire lives, registered our birthdays. They took fishermen for spies, then handed them back to our families broken into scales. They swiped our language and left only bare skeletons of folk tales. They closed us into prisons, while plantations stayed open for white people to throw weddings on. They closed in at the protest and beat us open, as if to batter their blood taste for blackness out on all the bodies their batons could touch. And I know, it may be irresponsible to use the word we, presumptuous pronoun us, in a poem. But this is a country, and we made us a possibility. An even plain, a wilderness of differences with the same height, the same health care, the same rights, the same blood, the same children, and I am in us, a mixture of countries and blood that met as comrades and created the same children. My ancestors come to my candle, whisper. We suffered different beneath the same rule, but our resistances rub shoulders, and the shared muscle is you. They told me that so I could tell you, my children. We have burned it all down for you. There are no prisons, only gardens. No wardens, only women with an eye on your progress as you make it home late at night. There are no cops, just your girls running up to form a chain, just witches twitching to twist up a perp's name with their tongues. There are no reservations, only free feast programs running from coast to coast. No cages, only open bars for boarders to mingle with hosts. We have every reason to toast the grand old guardsmen of convention because they were so wrong. We, the natives, survived the end they promised would never come, and we marched on. At some point, with our backs turned, the past entombed itself in glass, renamed itself history. We thought their war on us would always last, but here you are, blessed progeny of protest, anointed with ash, uprising every dawn. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Tiffany. I'm a co-founder and member of the Asian American Feminist Collective. We are a grassroots group, a collective based mostly in New York City. We do a lot of work around identity exploration and political education and space building. So we were responsible for co-curating and creating this bookshelf on this back wall. A little bit of context on it. As everyone knows, all of this violence that we've been experiencing since even before COVID-19, but is definitely exacerbated because of COVID-19, puts Asian American communities at this very interesting crosshairs of criminalization. We're seen both as victims and then scapegoats. And then, of course, our saviors are then assigned to us without our consent. And we see this through the way that this racist violence and incidents against our communities has been used as justification to fund and expand prison industrial complex and policing, which was the reason behind creating this bookshelf right here. As it was mentioned earlier, this bookshelf is actually sharing a wall with the Chinatown mega jail that is being built behind. Construction has already broken ground. This is a part of a multi-billion-dollar borough-based jail expansion that was signed in 2017. And we see this like all across the US, but especially in New York, it's especially obvious because we see Eric Adams is our mayor. We've been seeing increased policing in subways, only to basically displace houseless people and mentally ill people. And then, of course, we see this expansion, which is going to obviously also displace people. And, you know, we're not necessarily opposing it for like, you know, NIMBY purposes, not in your, you know, not in my backyard, but for other reasons, because we understand how us being used as scapegoats to increase policing negatively impacts our communities and fellow, you know, marginalized communities. Sorry, I'm rambling right now. But anyway, thank you. I'm very nervous. I don't do public speaking very good. So back there, though, you can, you know, read, explore, you know, like touch the things that we have on the shelf. We have books and zines on mass incarceration, abolition, radical imaginations, and practices of love and care. And we hope that, you know, just continuing to read and educate ourselves can help us all learn how to move forward with those practices rather than ones of disposal and ones that bolster policing in prisons. So also another contribution that we had was our zines, which you can see over there underneath the bulletin board. We have a few zines that y'all can peruse. And then up on the top right of the bulletin, we also have an open letter that in 2020 we wrote in response to the Asian Hate Crime Task Force. This was something that was formed in response to a lot of the, you know, anti-Asian sentiments and violence that was happening around the height of COVID in New York City. And so I would like to read a truncated version of it. You can read the full version on the wall there, or you can just Google cop-free communities, and it's the first thing that shows up, because it's titled, "We Want Cop-Free Communities Against the Creation of Asian Hate Crime Task Force by the NYPD." So I'm gonna read a portion of it. In response to the spike of racialized violence against Asians during the COVID-19 pandemic, the NYPD announced in August 2020 the creation of a permanent task force to address hate crimes against Asian New Yorkers and is considered other culture-based task forces for the future. As members of the Asian American community in New York City, we denounce the creation of the Asian Hate Crime Task Force by the NYPD. We do not believe this task force will make us safer, but instead will put our communities, especially the most vulnerable, at greater risk. We do not support any initiative that expands the power of police, nor do we believe in carceral responses to address racist violence. The city has no right to scapegoat our communities. NYPD and other council members who voted against defunding police accuse Asians of not cooperating with police, but the reality is survivors of anti-Asian harassment do not cooperate with police because they are afraid of police. Our communities stand to face greater harm because of police. For example, in the mid-1990s, during an escalating period of anti-immigrant violence, CAV, Organizing Asian Communities, documented 71 incidents of anti-Asian violence in New York City, with almost half of those cases involving law enforcement as the primary perpetrators of violence. South Asian and Muslim communities continue to experience ongoing racial and religious profiling and surveillance by police. Police have also worked to harass Asian immigrant workers, including street vendors, massage parlor workers, delivery workers, and taxi drivers through stops, raids, and fines. They have targeted Asian sex workers and asylum seekers. The NYPD works closely with ICE to detain and deport our communities. In these ways and more, police and prison industrial complex hurt our communities. Culturally specific police reforms will not help our communities. Despite historical mass policing budgets and endless task forces, these reforms have never stopped anti-Asian violence or racism happening in the first place. We question the city's decision to supply more funds toward policing of already criminalized communities rather than the provision of language services and free cultural competency training for business owners. Further, tough-on-crime policies are often used against communities already marginalized. They obscure the systemic violence of policing and individualizes violent action that, in reality, are an expression of a racist structure. They do not lead to justice, nor do they address the root causes of racial violence. In the long fight against racial, sexual, and gendered violence, carceral punishment is not the answer to keeping our communities safe. And we refuse to be used as another excuse to harm people of color, specifically Black folks, in our name. We also reject the complicity and active participation of Asians in the expansion of policing. But we uplift how Asian community groups within New York City, primarily through the leadership of women, queer, trans, and gender nonconforming people, have long fought against the expansion of policing in prisons. Groups like CAV, Mekong NYC, and DRUM have organized for economic and racial justice through anti-policing initiatives to defund the NYPD and end surveillance. Red Canary Song organizes to decriminalize sex work in New York City and address the harms of police violence and harassment against migrant sex workers. The Chinatown Art Brigade has also worked in solidarity with campaigns against the borough-based jail expansion, including opposing the construction happening in Chinatown right now. The creation of this task force is a thinly veiled operation to get more cops in Asian communities. So what do we need instead? Instead of investing more resources to the NYPD, our communities need anti-violence infrastructures that don't replicate or support systems that cage and dispose of people. Bystander and upstander trainings better enable community interventions and responses to disrupting racist attacks and violence. Rather than bilingual cops, we need more funding for language justice so our communities can have necessary translation and interpretation for accessing care, benefits, and services. Rather than bringing more police into our homes and communities, we need safe and accessible housing. We need institutional support for nail vendors, nail salon workers, and other precarious Asian American workers, including the decriminalization of sex work. These forms of support will keep us safe, and continuing the lineages of anti-imperialist, anti-capitalist, and anti-racist movements before us, we continue to demand the abolition of prison, police, and military complex. We demand no more cops and no more cages in our communities. Thank you.
So I'm going to read an excerpt from a lovingly co-written piece with volunteers of the APA Voices project. It feels too soon to write about the COVID-19 pandemic, yet not soon enough. Despite over 2 years in the pandemic, including living in and noting its impacts on everyday life and its exacerbation of structural issues of race, class, gender, and sexuality, its rapid changes feel both ongoing and difficult to capture. It also feels immediate and pressing to document. When we first considered collectively writing about our shared involvement with APA Voices, we sat with what it means to stay in and write from a place of unending rupture, anxiety, and depression, as well as anger and urgency. How does one write from a space of dwelling in and wellness? In part, dwelling in and wellness reflects how APA Voices refuses the white supremacist capitalist imperative to move on and to prevail through a time marked as transient and exceptional. But as APA Voices slowly took shape through the gathering of nuanced stories, personal records, cultural work, and resonating silences, we began to acknowledge how we ourselves are not outside of the pandemic. Rather, we too are navigating disparate levels of physical, socioeconomic, and emotional precarity and are entangled within and beyond the pandemic's folds. Some of us gave birth and welcomed new members into our families. Some of us were and are caregivers of young children and elders, many of whom made regular cameos in our Zoom meetings. Some of us became sick. Some of us lost loved ones. Some of us have been uprooted by new jobs and new homes. Some of us lost homes. It is in this shape-shifting context, in the interstices between life and death, that we have been seeding and growing this project these last 3 years. Thus, dwelling in wellness is our refusal to adjust and to return to business as usual. It is our refusal to be good minoritarian subjects, as we've been told to do by the various institutions in which we are enmeshed. As detailed in the remainder of this work, dwelling in wellness is also an intentional form of writing that emerged from our need to stop and acknowledge how and where we are, and to create a sense of slowness against the backdrop of relentless demands, despite the fact that millions of people across the globe were becoming ill and dying. For us, slowness is an opportunity to be still and reflect on the harm produced by the exploitative conditions, which tells us there is never enough time to rest, to feel overwhelmed, to be exhausted, to stay in bed, to grieve, and to care of one another. In writing with and in rather than about this project, we begin this collective essay with the following questions. Given that cross-racial solidarity, radical care, and intersectionality are core principles of this project, how do we connect our experiences of prolonged crises to the APA voices and to one another through dwelling in wellness? How might this shared form of analysis and collective writing compel the writers and readers of this essay to reckon with what it means to be alive?
I just want to take a moment to say thank you to Mia and Diane, and acknowledge that this project was both a source. It was a great deal of kind of trauma being worked out, and also work, just labor. But it was also a source of nourishment, and so those two things kind of are part and parcel of what this feels like. It's sort of something being born and something dying. Just thank you all for coming. So this piece was written a year and a half ago when we were kind of collectively working it out, and it reflects on a year and a half before that. And it starts with the quote by Bell Hooks: "We need not contain grief." All I wanted to do during this pandemic, I realized during its deepest hole, was keep us alive, make sure we were healthy and whole, my children, mother, partner, family, friends. I felt a feral responsibility for my mother, prepping bags of food and dropping them off weekly, buying masks and sanitizer, FaceTiming her nightly, warning her not to go outside. My mother, hair white as snow, the social butterfly who makes friends at every turn, exchanges phone numbers with strangers. If only I could keep her safe through the world unraveling. Surely I could keep her safe. She had lived through World War, Civil War, famine, immigration, isolation, racism, sexism, mockery, financial hardship, invisibility, so much fucking trauma. 20 months in, 2 vaccine shots, 1 bilateral knee surgery, dozens of appointments, 1 booster later. Where has it gotten us, Mommy? When the oncologist told me last week you had gastric cancer which had spread, it was like every thread I had stitched, not just for the last 20 months, but every thread I had ever sewn, every thread connecting me to anything had come undone. Breathe in. It was April 2020, and I wanted to reach out and make something, create a ritual, care for each other in a way where fear wasn't the animating impulse, as it had been since the start of the pandemic and even before. When I sent an email to Tamia, Laura, and Amita at NYU and friends and acquaintances that I had worked or broken bread with, it was a shot in the dark, a hand grasping for another during this strange time. Others responded to the idea that here was something meaningful we might make, sustained by what I recognize now to be an ancient yet evolving praxis of feminist, anti-imperialist, anti-racist care work. Breathe. I have been told by doctors and others it's unhealthy to stay stuck, that there's a time to grieve. I know, Mommy, you will pass from this earth, but let me please stay, please, in your presence and present as a way to be nourished by my history, in fact, as a way to keep me alive. Having spent so much of the last decade in grief, caring for others, tired as hell, this project has been a way to, as one colleague told me, after hearing about your cancer, to fight, but also to lean on each other, gather our stories as a way to locate ourselves. Questions rising up like air. What is truly a care infrastructure? How do we enact an ethics of care as a norm? How do we hold each other? Seeing care as part of and apart from the ordinary world of work deepens our understanding of our labor and our bodies, a lesson feminist geographers, sociologists of work, and disability justice activists have long been telling us. That which is not usually said aloud as we wash the bodies of our ailing parents, or clean soil diapers, or live with or die by the traumas of violence, or death, or poverty. Inside this pandemic, this is what we felt in our bones, especially those for whom caregiving was not new, for whom the racial reckoning has long been in the making, for whom precarity was already a feature of life. Like Guan Yin, Mommy, you show me how to fill this earth with compassion and care. You are the body that tells me why we hold on, that the feral need to stay alive during this moment was not a first-person singular project or a family affair. I want to be part of something that demonstrates our capacity to fight and to care for each other, to grieve and feel joy simultaneously and variously. Though language fails me and you never agree to an interview, we are gathering prior and present moments in histories, harvesting space and time itself, stitching together new futures, making a record, not for an imagined moment or an abstract cause, but for us.
Hello everyone, thank you for coming today. My name is Hyun Yoon. I'm one of the members of APA Voices, as well as one of the curatorial members of this exhibit. And I'm also a PhD candidate at Rutgers University, Newark, which is important for the reflection that I'm going to be reading for you. So it's called, I'm going to be reading pieces from this piece called, my reflection called Friendships Revealed. So, let's start. As an immunocompromised person, the start of COVID-19 in March 2020 signified the shrinking of my physical reality to my parents and my university campus and apartment. The only person-to-person interaction that I had was with my family members, dad, mom, and younger brother. My mom and I would only leave the house to go on our daily walk around town, bundled up in layers and in a mask. For the first several months of the pandemic, my close friends and I kept each other informed of our remote work and physical realities while playing board games through an online simulator. We weren't physically together, but we were close enough. Things started to change by summer 2020. While I remained in quarantine, some friends in the area hung out together at each other's homes. In the meantime, my reality in the virtual space grew in scope as I became heavily involved in union activities, made new personal and academic connections, and taught online. It was also during this time that I filled out a form to declare my interest in becoming a volunteer for APA Voices. In January 2021, I received an email from APA Voices and joined the curriculum committee. Although seemingly late to join the project, I received a warm welcome from the core members and volunteers and felt empowered to participate in different committees and projects. I got to know everyone better and became integrated in this virtual community with volunteers from New York and New Jersey to California and Washington. Meeting so many intelligent, caring, and open Asian Americans, especially Asian American women, was a welcome change after 2020, which was a time when I faced doubts and uncertainty with the state of my dissertation research dealing with Korean America. Through APA Voices, I connected and reconnected with old and new friends. Of all my interviews, Gina stuck with me the most. After her grandmother was nearly hit by a rock thrown by an attacker on her own property, Gina became more vocal against anti-Asian hate. However, she learned that some friends were unwilling to support her because they were afraid of being an outcast in other social circles, or they might get put on a list with their employer. As Gina said, the pandemic revealed a lot of people's hearts and a lot of people's real personalities and real priorities. I reflected about the commonality of Gina's and my experiences when I had my own falling out a few months after this interview. Some friends kept silent and didn't defend me when I called out anti-Semitic, misogynistic, and racist comments made by a newer addition to the group. Gina chose to change the people with whom she surrounds herself, and so have I. We are each dwelling in unwellness, but that doesn't mean we are unable to take steps to make the unwellness a little more bearable in whatever manner that means for us. Thank you, and I'm going to pass it on to Vivian.
Hi everyone, I'm Vivian Truong. I'm one of the core committee members of the APA Voices Project, and thank you again to Diane and Tomie for bringing us all together today, and to ISS. This has been such a wonderful culmination and expansion, as Diane said, of the project. So I'm going to read our collectively written conclusion to this piece that Diane, Lena, and Hyun just read from. At the time of writing, the Omicron variant of the coronavirus had just broken national and global records for the highest daily number of cases since the beginning of the pandemic. The new variant made clear that vaccines provide protection from the worst effects of the virus, but they do not mean an end to COVID-19. Meanwhile, the vaccine patent was still in place, and so many did not have access to medical care. Corporations continue to profit from the tragedies of this pandemic. Largely due to global vaccine inequity, the pandemic has stretched far longer than many of us imagined when we began this project. Memory projects often presume a before, during, and after, but the pandemic has raised the porousness of these demarcations. What does it mean to develop and sustain a memory project in what feels like an interminable crisis? Is the pandemic a discrete moment in time that we can capture and eventually look back on? What is the future from which we will remember COVID-19? As we began building the APA Voices project, we grappled with the ethics of documentation in an era of mass trauma. Noting the proliferation of documentation efforts in the midst of the pandemic and Black Lives Matter protests in the summer of 2020, archivist Ira Tansey questioned, quote, the mad rush to collect things for the sake of feeling we need to respond right away. The pandemic challenges our sense of time, not only with respect to the extent of crises, but our responses to them. Forced to reconsider operating with a temporary sense of urgency, we instead intentionally move toward a slowness that understands the deep roots and long reaches of the crises we document. We thus have taken dwelling in unwellness as a shared analysis of this prolonged rupture, as well as a stitched form of collective writing influenced by Asian Americanist, feminist, and disability justice orientations toward care. We have had to rethink Western paradigms that primarily view oral history as objects or recordings preserved for future research. Instead, oral history is a form of relationship building, a chance to reconnect in an era of isolation. Relatedly, the archives are a way of memorializing the people and futures we've lost. For those of us in or adjacent to academia, our collaborative process of storytelling has created alternatives to capitalist imperatives to individually produce, move on, and go back to normal. Dwelling in unwellness is not a retreat into despair, but an acknowledgement of collective trauma. It is a breath, a precondition for caring for ourselves and others. Rather than plowing forward as if we were immune to the effects of the pandemic and the political, economic, and social crises it has brought to the fore, dwelling in unwellness allows us to recognize and tend to our grief. Through collective writing, we have created a space of seeing each other's humanity through the pixels on our respective screens and listened for what was left unsaid. We invite you to write and dwell with us. Thank you. I'll pass it back to Diane.
So I know we went way over time, but I hope it was well worth it. I want to thank so many people. Tomie for doing this with me in 1 week. Shannon, Beatrice, ISS, Sophia, Chung and Issei for the beautiful activation of the Red Canary installation, to Taiyo, to T, Kristina, Kai, Tiffany from AAFC, Lena, Hyun, and Vivian for sharing your beautiful words with us. I'm at a loss for what else to say. I'm just really looking forward to being in space with all of you and seeing everything up here for one last time before it all goes down.
This is our last evening at 127 Walker as community activators, and we have a wonderful DJ, Rochelle Kwan, who will be playing some great music. So I hope you'll celebrate with us. And I wish I could join you if you're dancing, but I think this is time to enjoy ourselves and be together. So thank you all for coming.